Hands up, don't move. Who are you and what are you doing out here?
I'm waiting on someone. Why you
You're
ask?
stalling. You're acting like you got something to hide.
I'm acting like a normal person who waits for something.
You're in cuffs until I figure you out.
You just did damage you can't undo.
What happens when a high-stakes narcotic sting is ruined not by a criminal, but by a fellow officer? A patrol cop let bias take over, targeted a black undercover FBI agent, and exposed him in the middle of an active operation. This was not a small mistake. It wrecked a federal case, put an agent in danger, and turned into the kind of lawsuit that ends careers. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories about abuse of power, getting exposed and punished, like the video and subscribe. This one deserves your attention. The man at the center of it was FBI Special Agent Andre Carson. At the moment everything went wrong, Carson was sitting in a gray sedan near a line of warehouse units on the south side of the city. He had been undercover for months inside a narcotics network that moved fentanyl and cocaine across county lines. That night was supposed to be the final step before takedowns. A controlled buy was underway. Surveillance teams were in place. Local narcotics units were monitoring. Federal agents were waiting for the deal to move far enough to lock in the larger case. Then Officer Brett Hollis saw Carson's car and decided he had found his own stop. Hollis was a patrol officer, not part of the task force. He was the kind of officer who wanted activity on every shift and attention after every arrest. Supervisors liked his numbers. They ignored the complaints that followed him. Most of those complaints came from black drivers who said he escalated too fast, acted like suspicion was proof, and treated every stop like a personal challenge. Nothing serious had stuck to him yet. That made him even more confident. The operation had strict instructions that night. Marked patrol units were supposed to stay out of the area unless command requested them. Dispatch had already told patrol supervisors that sensitive law enforcement activity was happening around the warehouse corridor. Officers were not supposed to start random stops there. The reason was simple. One marked cruiser in the wrong place could kill the whole case. Hollis still inserted himself. He saw Carson's sedan moving slowly off the service road behind the warehouses and called it in. The plate came back clean. There was no warrant, no stolen hit, no urgent alert. He kept following anyway. He later claimed the driver looked nervous and out of place. That explanation fell apart later because Bodycam and dispatch logs showed he had nothing concrete when he decided to act. Carson noticed the patrol vehicle almost immediately. He could not handle the stop the way an ordinary federal agent would. Two vehicles connected to the target group were still nearby. One sat near the loading area. Another was parked farther back with a clear view of the access road. Carson had spent months building credibility with men who trusted nobody. If they saw him openly identify himself to police, the case was finished. If they thought he was cooperating with law enforcement, the danger would go far beyond a failed arrest plan. When Hollis activated his lights, Carson had no good option. He pulled into an open section of pavement and stopped. He kept his movements controlled and visible. He tried to speak in a way that would alert a trained officer without exposing himself to the suspects who were still close enough to watch. He used phrases that should have made Hollis pause and reassess. He tried to slow the stop down. Hollis did the opposite. He came out hard and treated the scene like a felony takedown. He shouted commands, closed distance too quickly, and pointed his weapon at Carson before he had any real understanding of what he was interrupting. His body cam later showed that he was not investigating by that point. He had already decided what Carson was supposed to be. That decision mattered. Carson was a black man in an unmarked sedan in an industrial corridor after dark. Hollis saw that and built the rest in his own head. He did not see the operation. He did not see the possibility that another officer might be working. He did not see the tactical signs that the area was under active surveillance. He saw somebody he wanted to dominate in public. Carson tried again to get him to slow down. He told him, carefully, that this stop was creating a serious problem. He tried to direct Hollis toward checking with a supervisor, He avoided anything that would fully blow his cover in front of the men watching from nearby. Hollis took that as defiance. This is where officers like him become dangerous. They stop listening because they think control is the same thing as being right. Once that switch flips, everything becomes non-compliance. Every word becomes attitude. Every hesitation becomes guilt. Inside the command post, people were already realizing what was happening. Lieutenant Elena Ruiz, who was coordinating the local side of the task force, heard the traffic and knew a patrol officer had drifted into the middle of a sealed operation. She ordered dispatch to stop the contact. A patrol supervisor repeated the order. The message reached Hollis. He did not disengage. That point destroyed his defense later. He was not acting in confusion. He had been told to back off and kept going. At the same time, the drug deal was coming apart. The target group did not need a full explanation. They only needed to see their supposed buyer pinned down in headlights by a marked officer. One vehicle started moving out of the lot. Another cut away from the warehouse side and headed toward the main road. Surveillance units called out movement over the radio. Within seconds, the controlled buy was dead. Carson was still trying to manage two disasters at once. He had to survive an aggressive stop without giving the suspects a clean answer about who he was. Hollis kept pressing. He ordered Carson out of the vehicle. He ignored the warning signs in front of him. He ignored command. He ignored the possibility that he was about to destroy months of work. Then he got close enough to see equipment under Carson's jacket line. A careful officer would have paused there. Carson was not carrying himself like a street dealer. His setup did not match the picture Hollis had created. That should have forced a reset. Hollis doubled down instead. That is what pride looks like, when a man realizes he may be wrong but refuses to admit it. He escalated because backing off would have meant admitting he had made a bad stop. He cared more about winning the moment than understanding it. By then, the suspects had seen enough. The buyer they had been testing for months was now being treated like a criminal by uniformed police. Carson knew the case was gone. He also knew his face, his vehicle, and his value as an undercover agent were probably gone with it. Hollis moved in to put him in cuffs. That was the moment a patrol officer destroyed a federal narcotics operation, exposed a fellow law enforcement officer, and started the chain of events that would end his career. Hollis pulled Andre Carson out of the sedan and forced him onto the pavement while the operation died around them. That was the real damage. Not just the handcuffs. Not just the public humiliation. The suspects were watching a man they believed was a drug buyer get handled by uniformed police like he was dirty. In undercover work, that kind of scene does not create confusion. It creates certainty. Carson was burned. The surveillance team reported the first exit almost immediately. One target vehicle left through the rear access road. A second moved toward the highway. Then the communications line got worse. The primary seller had stopped answering. The courier phone went dark. A spotter vehicle that had been sitting 2 buildings over disappeared. Months of work started collapsing in less than a minute. Carson was on the ground trying to protect what little he still could. He told Hollis as carefully as he could under the circumstances that he was interfering with an active law enforcement matter. He told him to get a supervisor to the scene. He tried to keep his words narrow because every extra detail made things worse if the suspects were still close enough to hear. Hollis kept pushing. His body cam later showed the problem clearly. He was not controlling a dangerous suspect. He was performing authority. He repeated commands Carson was already trying to follow. He spoke over him. He treated every attempt to slow the encounter as resistance. That is what made the footage so bad for the department later. The tone did not look professional, it looked personal. Then Lieutenant Elena Ruiz arrived. She came in fast, identified Carson, and ordered the cuffs off immediately. The recording captured the moment Hollis realized he had stopped the wrong man. He did not switch into concern. He did not ask what he had interrupted. He did what officers like him always do first. He defended himself. He said Carson had been suspicious. He said he was doing his job. He said nobody told him enough. That excuse was already dead. Dispatch logs showed he had been warned before the stop got aggressive. Radio audio showed a supervisor telling him to disengage. The task force command channel had already flagged the area as sensitive. Hollis had all the information he needed to back off. He chose not to. Ruiz was not subtle about what had just happened. She told him he had blown an active operation. She told him targets were already fleeing. She told him to stop talking and get out of the way. Carson got to his feet, but the damage was done. The men he had spent months getting close to were gone. So was the case structure built around him. That night should have ended with coordinated arrests, sealed evidence, and search warrants. It ended with frantic recovery work. Teams tried to pick up what they could. Highway units searched for vehicles that had already split in different directions. Surveillance reviewed last known movements. Analysts started freezing numbers tied to the target phones. None of it fixed the core problem. Leon Voss, the main target, had been cautious for years. Once he saw signs that law enforcement pressure had touched his circle, he adapted fast. By sunrise, stash locations were being cleared out. Burner phones were gone. One rented warehouse was emptied before a warrant team could get to it. The task force did not just lose a buy. They lost momentum, access, leverage, and the one undercover lane that had gotten them inside the organization. Carson paid the price first. He went straight from the scene into debriefing. Federal supervisors needed to know what the suspects had seen, what names had been used, what locations were now compromised, and whether he could safely stay in the field. The answer was obvious. He was done undercover in that case, probably done in that region for a long time. His face had been exposed in the worst possible context. Not as a police officer in a planned takedown, as a man being detained by uniformed patrol in front of criminals. People outside that work never understand how much that costs. An undercover identity is not a jacket you put on and take off. It takes months to build, sometimes longer. One careless patrol stop can wipe out years of credibility in one shot. Carson was furious, but not sloppy. He gave a clean statement. He documented every warning he had tried to give Hollis. He identified the exact point where the suspects would have understood the operation was compromised. He also made clear that this was not random bad luck. Hollis had no legal reason to force that stop into a takedown. He acted on an assumption, then escalated because he did not want to be challenged. Inside the local department, the reaction split almost immediately. The narcotics people were livid. They knew what had been lost. They had spent months supporting that case, coordinating with federal agents, and waiting for the operation to mature. To them, Hollis was the guy who stormed onto a chessboard, knocked over the pieces, and then acted like he deserved credit for showing initiative. Patrol leadership took a different tone. They started softening the language before the first reports were even finalized. The phrase they liked was miscommunication. That word showed up fast, too fast. It gave them cover. Miscommunication sounds procedural. It sounds shared. It spreads blame across the room. It avoids the real question, which was why Hollis saw a black man in an unmarked car and rushed to treat him like a felony suspect, even after multiple warnings told him to stop. Carson noticed that shift immediately. He also noticed something worse. Some people wanted him to help bury it. He was told the department needed time to review the evidence. He was told interagency relationships mattered. He was told everybody on the law enforcement side needed to avoid emotional reactions. That kind of language always means the same thing. They want the injured person to stay calm while the institution builds its escape route. Carson did not play along, but he was still boxed in for the moment. He had to protect federal procedures. He had to wait for official reviews. He had to sit through meetings where people talked about communication breakdowns instead of saying what happened plainly. A patrol officer ignored orders, profiled the wrong man, and wrecked an active operation. That was the truth. Everybody in the room knew it. Some were just more willing than others to say it. Then the footage started getting reviewed in full. That changed the temperature, because once command saw the body cam next to dispatch audio and task force logs, the story got harder to smooth over. Hollis had not walked into a confusing scene and made an understandable mistake. He had driven the stop with his own ego from the beginning. He had been warned. He had been corrected. He had kept going. And there was one more problem for him. This was not his first complaint. The evidence killed the department's excuse. Once command reviewed the body cam with the dispatch logs and task force timeline, the story changed. Hollis had no traffic stop to justify what he did. No warrant hit, no emergency. He picked Carson, escalated fast, and ignored orders to stop. Then they checked his history. His prior stop showed the same pattern. Black drivers, aggressive tone. Thin reasons for the stop. Complaints that went nowhere. Supervisors had seen enough over the years to know he was a problem. They kept him on the street anyway. The department still tried to protect itself. Internal Affairs drafted a summary calling it a communication failure during a complex operation. That wording was not accidental. It spread blame around and took the focus off Hollis. Carson rejected it immediately. He told federal supervisors the stop was not caused by confusion between agencies. It started with profiling. Everything after that came from Hollis refusing to back off. The local department stalled. Hollis was pulled from patrol, but not fired. Command delayed decisions, meetings piled up, reports got rewritten. Nobody wanted to be the one who said the plain truth in writing. A patrol officer had racially profiled a black FBI agent, ruined an undercover case, and ignored direct warnings while doing it. Carson also got pushed aside. He was taken off field work connected to the case. Officially, they said his cover was burned and his safety had to come first. That part was true. The other truth was simpler. He had become a liability for people trying to keep the scandal contained. The narcotics case collapsed for good in the weeks after the stop. Leon Voss disappeared. Phones went dead. One storage site was cleared out before a warrant team reached it. Informants stopped calling back. The task force did not lose one transaction. They lost the case structure they had spent months building. That loss had a price. The failed sting burned surveillance work, overtime, informant payments, technical resources, and seizure plans. The cost climbed into the millions once the city counted wasted case development and the lawsuit risk that followed. Then Carson made the move that ended any chance of a quiet cleanup. He hired civil rights attorney Dana Mercer. Mercer treated the case exactly the way the department feared. Not as one bad stop, as a chain of misconduct, profiling, operational recklessness, supervisory failure, cover-up language after the fact. She moved fast. She demanded body cam, CAD logs, radio traffic, briefing records, stop data, prior complaints, training files, and internal drafts. She wanted to know what Hollis knew, when he knew it, and why the department kept softening the language. Depositions made it worse. Supervisors had to explain why Hollis stayed engaged after being told to disengage. Internal Affairs had to explain why early reports avoided the profiling issue. Command staff had to answer for years of ignored warning signs in Hollis's record. Hollis stuck to the same defense. He said Carson looked suspicious. He said he acted decisively in a dangerous area. That did not hold up because the recording showed he kept escalating after he had reasons to stop. Then he gave the answer that finished him. During sworn testimony, Hollis said he thought Carson was trying to manipulate the stop the way offenders often do. That line exposed the whole mindset. He had already placed Carson into a category before he knew who he was. After that, everything Carson said was filtered through that assumption. By that point, the city understood it had a serious problem. The stop could no longer be explained away as a patrol mistake. The record showed pattern. The footage showed escalation. The transcript showed ignored warnings. Carson had the evidence, the discipline, and the lawyer to force all of it into the open. And now the department had to decide whether it wanted to keep protecting Hollis or save itself. The city did not defend Hollis all the way through trial because the evidence was too bad. The body cam hurt him. The dispatch records hurt him more. The task force logs made it worse. He had been told to disengage and stayed in the stop anyway. That point never went away. The lawsuit ended in a major settlement. Carson's legal team argued that the stop cost him more than public humiliation. It destroyed months of undercover work, damaged his future operational use in that region, and put him at risk in front of narcotics targets. The city understood a jury would not like that story. A black FBI agent gets profiled by a local patrol officer. A federal case gets wrecked. And then the department tries to call it miscommunication. That was not a trial they wanted, so they paid. The exact number became a headline because it was large enough to embarrass everyone involved. Bigger than most people expected. Big enough that local media stopped treating the case like an internal dispute and started calling it what it was, a preventable disaster. Hollis did not survive it. First, he was suspended. Then the department moved to terminate him. His past complaints came back into the record. His stop history got reviewed in full. His sworn testimony made him look worse, not better. He had no strong defense left. He lost his job. And after that, he lost his law enforcement certification. That was the real end. Getting fired is one thing. Losing certification means the career is dead. His supervisors did not walk away clean either. 2 command staff members were forced out after the report language, and delayed response came under review. Internal Affairs took heat for trying to soften the facts. Patrol leadership got hammered for years of ignored warning signs in Hollis's record. The department had spent too long protecting a problem officer because his numbers looked good on paper. That habit got expensive. Carson never got the case back. Leon Voss stayed gone long enough to break the operation for good. Other investigators eventually picked pieces of the network apart through separate cases, but the original federal sting was finished the night Hollis made that stop. Months of work were gone. Carson's cover was gone. That part could not be repaired by any settlement. What Carson did get was public vindication. He refused to let the department write the story for him. That mattered. A lot of officers are told to stay quiet for the sake of agency relationships or the chain of command. Carson went the other way. He documented everything, challenged the false narrative early, and forced the city to answer for what happened. Without that, Hollis probably gets a short suspension. The department buries the language, and everybody moves on. After the case, the department changed policy because it had to. Patrol officers got tighter restrictions around active federal and task force zones. Dispatch procedures changed. Mandatory verification steps were added before self-initiated stops near protected operations. Bias review on stop data got more serious because the city could no longer pretend that pattern complaints were random. Supervisors also lost some discretion to ignore repeated conduct flags from officers with aggressive histories. That was the only useful thing left to do. Admit the old system failed and lock some of those doors. The story stuck because the irony was brutal. A narcotics sting aimed at a drug network didn't collapse because the suspects outplayed investigators. It collapsed because one patrol officer saw a black man, trusted his own bias more than command, and thought the badge on his chest protected him from being wrong. It did not. It cost him his job. It cost him his certification. It cost the city millions. It exposed the department's instincts when one of their own caused the damage. And it proved something people keep learning the hard way. Ego inside a uniform can be just as dangerous as the threat officers claim they are stopping. That was the end of Brett Hollis as a cop. And for Andre Carson, the win was not clean, but it was real. He did not get his case back. He did not get those months back. He did get the truth on record, and he made sure the man who burned him could not hide behind the badge again. What would you have done in Carson's position? Stayed quiet or forced it into the open? Put your answer in the comments. Share the story with someone who thinks abuse inside law enforcement never gets punished. And subscribe for more stories like this. Police overreach keeps getting defended right up until the footage is too clear to spin. In this case, a patrol stop turned into a career-ending mistake when one officer pushed past the law, ignored valid documents, and picked the wrong driver to test. What made this one different was simple. The man behind the wheel wasn't just another citizen trying to get home. He was the head of internal affairs in the same department, and the officer had no idea. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about police misconduct, civil rights, and real accountability, like and subscribe. Cases like this matter because most abuse of power only gets taken seriously when the evidence is impossible to hide. The stop started early evening on a busy city corridor near restaurants and office buildings. The vehicle was a dark Lamborghini Urus. The driver was Andre Bennett, black, early 40s, off-duty, dressed in a polo and slacks after a private business dinner. He wasn't speeding through traffic or drawing attention to himself. He was just driving an expensive SUV through the wrong part of town in the eyes of the officer who saw him. That officer was Tyler Voss. The moment Voss pulled in behind the Urus, the stop stopped being about traffic. He had already decided the driver didn't fit the vehicle. Everything after that came from that assumption. He approached the window and mentioned a traffic reason for the stop, but he didn't stay on it. His focus shifted right to the SUV and to Andre. He asked for license, registration, and insurance. Andre handed everything over without delay. The documents were valid. The vehicle was registered correctly. Insurance was active. The license matched. There was nothing unusual in the paperwork. Voss didn't accept that. He started asking ownership questions that had nothing to do with a normal stop. He wanted to know whose vehicle it really was, how long Andre had it, what he did for work, where he had been, and why he was driving in that area. He wasn't checking facts tied to the stop. He was looking for a crack somewhere else. Andre stayed calm. He answered what he had to answer and didn't give Voss more than the stop required. He knew the difference between a traffic inquiry and a fishing expedition. He also knew that once an officer stopped looking at the documents and started looking for a story, the encounter could turn fast. Voss went back to his cruiser and ran the information. Nothing supported his suspicion. The SUV wasn't stolen. Andre had no warrant. His license was clear. The insurance checked out. Registration was current. The stop should have ended there with a citation or a warning, depending on the original reason. Voss came back more aggressive. That told the whole story. He had checked the facts, and the facts had failed him. Instead of accepting that, he started trying to force the stop in another direction. He questioned Andre again as if the same valid documents had somehow become less valid in the last 2 minutes. He spoke like the paperwork itself was suspicious because it didn't match his assumption. He kept asking about money, work, and ownership. He treated a legal luxury vehicle like it was evidence by itself. Andre didn't react. That made Voss more confident. Officers like that often read self-control as weakness. They think calm means they can keep leaning. So Voss kept leaning. By then, people nearby had started paying attention. Traffic had slowed. A man waiting in a parked rideshare across the street began recording with his phone. A couple on the sidewalk slowed down when they saw Voss staying at the driver's window longer than a normal stop would require. Voss either didn't notice or didn't care. Andre still didn't tell him who he was. He wanted to see the stop for what it really was, not what it would become once rank entered the scene. If Voss was willing to do this to a driver with valid documents, then Andre had no reason to rescue him from his own choices. Voss asked for consent to search the vehicle. Andre refused. Clean refusal, no argument, no speech, just a lawful no. That should have settled it. Refusal to consent is not probable cause. Any officer knows that. Voss knew it too. He just didn't want the stop to end without proving himself right. His tone changed. He started using broad, weak language that sounds official until someone checks it. He mentioned officer safety. He hinted that Andre was being evasive. He suggested there were inconsistencies, but he couldn't point to one that mattered. He was building the usual excuse stack officers use when they want more authority than the law gives them. Andre asked the right question. He asked whether Voss had legal grounds for anything beyond the traffic stop. Voss didn't answer it directly. He ordered Andre out of the vehicle. Andre complied. He stepped out, closed the door, and stood where Voss directed him. He didn't give him attitude. He didn't make sudden movements. He didn't help him either. He simply followed the order and watched Voss keep pushing the stop past its limit. Voss continued asking questions that had already been answered. He implied there might be something illegal inside the SUV. He still had no clear basis for that claim. No odor, no contraband in plain view, no conflicting documents, no admission, no alert from a K9, no specific fact that could support probable cause. He searched anyway. That was the decision that ended him. He moved into the vehicle without a lawful basis and started going through the interior as if he only needed to find one thing afterward to justify everything before it. That's not how the law works, and it's not how review boards look at stops once the video gets pulled. Andre told him the search was unlawful and requested a supervisor. Voss kept going. At that point, the stop was no longer a judgment call. It was misconduct on camera. The body cam captured Voss ignoring valid documents, stretching the stop, and treating refusal to consent like a reason to search. The dash cam captured the timeline. The bystander's phone video captured the tone from outside the car, which made the whole thing look worse. Voss had turned a routine stop into a personal challenge, and he was doing it in front of multiple cameras. Andre still did not reveal his position. Voss thought he was dealing with a driver he could pressure until something gave way. He had no idea he was minutes away from standing in front of the man who supervised internal misconduct investigations for the department. That reveal hadn't happened yet. The search came first. That was the part Voss would never be able to fix. Tyler Voss had already made the mistake that mattered. The unlawful search was on camera. Everything after that only made the fallout worse. Andre Bennett stood near the SUV and watched Voss keep moving through the interior like he could still rescue the stop by finding something. He checked the center console, looked through the front compartment areas, kept going long after it was obvious he was working backward from suspicion instead of forward from facts. Andre repeated that he wanted a supervisor. This time, Voss responded like a man getting irritated that the scene was no longer fully under his control. He still acted like he had time, like he could finish the search, lock in a report, and shape the story before anyone important showed up. That was his next bad read. A field supervisor, Lieutenant Elena Strickland, pulled up within minutes. She arrived expecting a routine assist on a traffic stop that had gotten tense. That changed fast. She saw Andre outside the vehicle, saw Voss still operating with too much heat, and saw the Lamborghini sitting open in a way that immediately raised the wrong questions. She asked Voss for the basis of the search. He gave her exactly the kind of answer that falls apart on review. He mentioned suspicious behavior, claimed the driver was evasive, referred to vague indicators. He spoke in generic language because generic language was all he had. He did not point to one clean fact that could justify entering the vehicle without consent. Strickland asked about the documents. Valid. She asked whether dispatch had returned anything on the vehicle or driver. Negative. She asked whether there was odor, contraband in plain view, a weapon concern, a warrant issue, or a K9 alert. None. That was the moment the stop started collapsing in real time. Andre then gave his name in full. Not just the name on the license, his full department identity. He told Strickland he was Commander Andre Bennett, head of internal affairs. That landed exactly the way it should have. Strickland's expression changed first, not dramatic, just immediate. She knew what it meant. Not because rank gave Andre special rights. It meant the department now had an off-duty command officer standing at the side of the road, directly alleging an unlawful search, with Bodycam rolling and at least one civilian recording from across the street. Voss froze for a second. That was the first honest moment he'd had all night. He realized he had not been controlling the stop. He had been documenting his own misconduct. Andre still didn't raise his voice. He didn't pull rank to threaten anyone. He didn't grandstand for the bystanders. He kept it clean. He stated that he had provided valid documents, denied consent, asked whether legal grounds existed for extending the stop, and then watched Voss search the vehicle anyway. He said the stop needed to be preserved exactly as it was, including all body cam, dash cam, radio traffic, and supervisor response times. That was a very bad sentence for Voss to hear, because now the scene had moved out of roadside argument territory and into evidence preservation. Strickland immediately told Voss to step back from the SUV. He tried to defend himself, claimed Andre's behavior raised red flags, claimed his training told him something was off, claimed he believed further investigation was justified. The problem was obvious. Belief wasn't enough, not for a search, not when every objective point had already cleared. The car was legal, the documents were legal, the driver was legal. Voss had turned a personal suspicion into police action and expected the uniform to carry him through the gap. It didn't. Strickland looked at Andre and asked one key question. Had there been consent at any point? Andre said no. That answer shut the door. The bystander across the street was still recording. A second person had started filming too. People didn't know who Andre was yet, but they knew what they were looking at. An officer had kept pushing a stop that didn't make sense, and a supervisor had just shown up to find him halfway inside a vehicle with no clear legal basis. Strickland then did what Voss should have expected from the beginning. She separated the scene. She directed another responding officer to remain with Andre. She pulled Voss aside. She asked for a direct timeline, not a speech. Why the stop started, what was observed, what facts developed, what specific legal threshold he believed he had met before entering the vehicle. His answers got worse when shortened. That happens a lot. Officers who lean on inflated reports usually sound stronger when they can bury weak facts under pages of wording. On scene with a supervisor asking short questions, the weakness shows immediately. What traffic violations started the stop? Minor and unclear. Minor. What developed after contact? Nothing concrete. What contradicted the documents? Nothing. What created probable cause? He could not say it cleanly because there was nothing clean to say. Andre stayed where he was and let the scene keep unfolding. He didn't need to help Voss fail. Voss was already doing that by himself. Strickland asked whether Voss had notified a supervisor before the search. He had not. Asked whether he sought consent more than once after the refusal. He had. Asked whether he documented any independent, articulable fact before entering the vehicle. He had not. That sequence mattered. It showed the real pattern. Voss had not discovered cause. He had tried to manufacture it. By then, another unit arrived. Then another supervisor. The stop had become a command issue. Not because Andre wanted theater, because the department now had exposure on multiple fronts at once. Possible civil rights violation, improper search, improper detention, false or inflated reporting risk, prior roadside footage from civilians. And one more problem nobody had spoken aloud yet. If Voss had done this with cameras everywhere, what had he done on stops with fewer witnesses? Andre finally gave Strickland the part that changed this from bad to catastrophic. He said he wanted all prior complaint history on Voss preserved and reviewed with the footage from the stop before anyone accepted a field explanation at face value. That hit because it told Strickland two things at once. First, Andre was not treating this like a personal insult. He was treating it like pattern misconduct. Second, there was a decent chance Voss already had a history. Voss heard that too. You could tell because his posture changed. The roadside confidence was gone. He stopped sounding like a patrol officer defending a hard call and started sounding like a man realizing the department might already know more about him than the scene itself showed. Strickland removed him from the active stop. Not suspended on the spot, not yet, but functionally done for the night. Another officer took over the scene documentation. Strickland informed Andre that the vehicle would not be touched further. She confirmed all video would be preserved. She requested command notification. She requested a formal administrative response. Andre gave one calm answer. He said that was the correct step. That was probably the worst part for Voss. Andre never gave him anger he could point to later. Never gave him a heated exchange to hide behind. The entire record showed one man staying controlled and another man pushing authority past the law because he didn't like what the driver represented. Before Andre left the scene, Strickland asked one final procedural question for the report. Did he intend to file a formal complaint? Andre told her this was already beyond a complaint. This was now an integrity review. That sentence finished the roadside part of the story. Because once internal affairs gets involved as a formal integrity matter, the officer's report is no longer the backbone of the case. The footage is. And the footage was terrible for Tyler Voss. The roadside part was over. The real damage started when the department pulled the footage and matched it against Tyler Voss's paperwork. That review moved fast. Not because the department suddenly cared about every bad stop. Departments rarely move that fast without pressure. This one moved because the victim was the head of internal affairs. The stop was captured from 3 angles, and the legal problem was obvious before anyone even wrote a summary memo. By the next morning, command staff had the body camera, dash cam, dispatch log, and the bystander video. They also had Voss's initial report. That report did not help him. He tried the usual repair job. He wrote that the driver's behavior raised suspicion. He claimed there were inconsistencies during the stop. He suggested the search followed developing indicators. On paper, he tried to make the encounter sound fluid and justified. On video, none of that held up. The footage showed Andre Bennett handing over valid documents right away. It showed no meaningful contradiction in his answers. It showed a calm refusal to consent. It showed Voss staying on the stop long after the traffic issue should have been resolved. Most important, it showed the search happening without any clear legal trigger. That alone was bad enough. Then Internal Affairs pulled Voss's complaint history. That changed the case from a single bad stop to a pattern. He had already been warned. Not once. More than once. The earlier complaints were not identical, but they all leaned the same way. Aggressive tone during routine stops, weak justification for prolonging contact, searches that pushed past the edge of lawful basis, drivers saying he treated them like suspects first and citizens second. In a lot of departments, that kind of record gets shrugged off until someone gets sued or a video goes public. This time, the department had both risk and proof sitting in the same file. Andre didn't personally run the review. That would have been sloppy and easy to attack later. He recused himself from direct handling and let the case move through formal channels. That mattered. It kept Voss from pretending this was personal retaliation. It wasn't. It was a misconduct case with unusually clean evidence. The review team started with the timeline. Why was the vehicle stopped? The original traffic basis was weak, but not the main problem. What happened after first contact? Valid license, valid registration, valid insurance. No warrant, no stolen vehicle return, no objective sign of criminal activity. What justified the extension of the stop? Nothing solid. What justified the search? Nothing lawful. That was the center of it. Once those answers were locked in, everything around Voss's report started looking worse. His wording wasn't just stretched. It looked engineered. He used broad phrases that officers use when they want discretion without facts. Training and experience, nervous behavior, inconsistent responses, officer safety concerns, suspicious circumstances. Those phrases can matter when they connect to actual observations. Here they were cover language. The video stripped them down. Command staff noticed something else. Voss's report sounded cleaner than the scene looked. That's always a bad sign. On camera, he looked irritated early and committed to escalation fast. In the report, he tried to sound measured. That gap matters in an administrative case because it suggests consciousness of guilt. He knew the stop looked bad, so he wrote around it. Then the bystander video made it even worse. Body camera footage often favors the officer by design. It sits on the officer's chest, captures what he faces, and misses how he looks to everyone else. The bystander angle gave the department the outside view. It showed how long Voss kept Andre at the roadside. It showed how often he stayed in Andre's space. It showed the search as something that did not follow a sudden discovery or emergency. It looked exactly like what it was. A patrol officer forcing a stop further and further because he couldn't accept being wrong. Once that angle got added, the department lost whatever room it had to soften the event. The legal office got involved next. That was predictable. A bad stop is one problem. A bad stop on a command officer with multiple video angles, prior complaints, and a weak report is a lawsuit package. Even if Andre chose not to sue, the department had to act like outside counsel might see every frame. They reviewed exposure for unlawful detention, unlawful search, and false statements in reporting. Voss was interviewed under administrative procedure. That interview went badly. He was asked to identify the exact point where the stop developed from traffic enforcement into criminal suspicion. He could not pin it down. He was asked what specific fact overrode the valid documents. He had no good answer. He was asked why refusal to consent seemed to change his behavior. He denied that it had, but the footage said otherwise. He was asked why he searched without calling for a canine, without waiting for a supervisor, and without a clear probable cause statement on audio first. That sequence trapped him. If he claimed urgency, the video did not support urgency. If he claimed probable cause, he could not articulate it. If he claimed officer safety, Andre had been compliant the entire time. Every route out closed on him. Then the prior incidents came back into the room. Investigators asked about earlier complaints where drivers described the same pattern. Routine stop, quick suspicion, repeated questioning after documents cleared, pressure for consent, search logic that didn't match the facts. Voss tried to separate each case. That didn't work. Pattern cases are built exactly that way. One incident can look messy. 4 similar incidents look intentional. By mid-review, command wasn't deciding whether Voss had a future. They were deciding how to contain the fallout. That's the part a lot of people don't understand. Departments will tolerate bad judgment for a long time. They stop tolerating it when the officer becomes impossible to defend. Tyler Voss had crossed that line. He had weak facts, bad video, prior warnings, and a report that collapsed under comparison. No chief wants to stand in front of city leadership, local media, or a civil jury and explain why that officer was still on the street. Andre stayed mostly out of public view while the review moved. He gave his statement. Preserve the evidence issue. Let the process work. That also made him harder to attack. Voss couldn't frame this as a power move by a superior officer using rank after the fact. Andre had actually done the opposite. He'd given Voss all the room in the world to treat him properly, and Voss had used that room to expose himself. One command-level memo summed up the problem in plain terms. Voss had treated personal suspicion like probable cause, and then tried to write the stop backward into legality after the fact. That was it. That was the whole case. The badge gave him authority. He supplied the misconduct himself. By the end of the week, the review file was no longer about corrective training or another warning. That option was dead. The recommendation moved toward termination, loss of police powers during the final process, and full preservation of records in case of outside inquiry. Tyler Voss had spent the stop trying to prove Andre Bennett did not belong in that vehicle. Now the department was preparing to prove Voss did not belong in uniform. The department moved quickly because it had no safe way to defend Tyler Voss. The stop was bad. The search was worse. The report made it final. Command reviewed the footage, the complaint history, and the administrative interview. Voss had already been warned before about aggressive stops and weak search justifications. This time, the evidence was too clean. He had ignored valid documents, extended the stop without legal grounds, searched the vehicle without probable cause, and then tried to write it up like the facts supported him. They stripped him of his badge and terminated him. The department also had to deal with the public side. Once word got out that the driver was Andre Bennett, the head of internal affairs, the story spread fast. Not because of his title alone, because people understood the bigger point right away. If an officer would do that to a command officer with valid documents, cameras rolling and witnesses nearby, then regular people had probably been getting the same treatment for years, with less protection and less proof. That was the real damage. The bystander video circulated first. Then local outlets picked up the story. Then the department had to answer the question it hates most. Why was this officer still on the street after earlier complaints raised the same issues? That forced changes. Command ordered a review of Voss's prior stops. Supervisors were told to tighten review of consent searches and stop extensions. Internal affairs flagged similar complaints for re-examination. Training got updated, but more important than training, supervisors were put on notice. Weak probable cause language was no longer going to slide just because an officer knew how to dress it up in a report. Andre kept his response controlled all the way through. He didn't make speeches. He didn't turn it into a public performance. He gave his statement, protected the record, and let the evidence do the work. That's why the ending hit as hard as it did. Tyler Voss thought the badge would carry his suspicion. It didn't. The video showed the truth. His history backed it up. His own report buried him. And the department had no choice but to make him the example. One stop, one bad decision chain. One officer convinced his instinct mattered more than the law. That cost him everything. What would you have done in Andre Bennett's place? Have you ever seen a stop go bad because an officer decided suspicion was enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with somebody who needs to see it, and subscribe for more.
Both of you stand up and get out, now.
What exactly are you detaining us for?
Missing
A
wallet.
complaint isn't probable cause.
I didn't ask for legal
You
commentary.
need to slow down and verify before you do something
Don't
stupid.
tell me how to do my job.
Then do it right.
You're being detained.
For what facts?
Felony theft, possible fraudulent
You
identification.
just made that worse. You
Stand
are
up.
interfering.
Officer Caleb Daniels thought he controlled that lunchroom. He thought 2 handcuffs, a loud voice, and a theft accusation would settle everything before anyone questioned him. He was wrong. Very wrong. Because the 2 black sisters he grabbed in front of half the restaurant were not random suspects. One was a federal prosecutor. The other was an FBI agent. Daniels didn't know that yet. He just knew they weren't reacting the way he wanted, and that got under his skin fast. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories where arrogant people push too far and get exposed for it, like this video, and subscribe. This happened during a weekday lunch rush in a downtown restaurant near the federal courthouse. Busy room. Lawyers, staffers, business people who noticed everything even when they pretended not to. Avery Cole and her younger sister Nia had met there for lunch because their schedules almost never matched. Avery was the older sister, 37, assistant U.S. attorney. Precise, calm, hard to shake. She dealt with pressure for a living and didn't waste words. Nia was 34, more reserved, more watchful. She worked for the FBI and was tied to an active matter she couldn't casually explain to a patrol officer in a crowded dining room. That became a problem within minutes. The trouble started with a missing wallet. A woman in the restaurant reported that her wallet was gone after she passed near the front of the room. She said she had bumped into the sisters earlier. That was enough for the manager to panic and call police. No camera check first. No serious attempt to verify anything. Just a quick assumption and a fast call. Daniels arrived ready to make an arrest scene out of it. He walked straight to their table with the manager behind him and told both women to stand up. Not asked, told. Avery looked up, stayed composed, and asked what facts connected them to any theft. Daniels didn't answer that cleanly because he didn't have much. He repeated the order and made it louder. That was the first shift. He wasn't investigating. He was asserting control. Avery didn't match his energy. She said she would comply with lawful instructions, but she wanted the basis for the detention. That should have slowed a decent officer down. It didn't slow Daniels at all. He heard a legal question and treated it like disrespect. He ordered both sisters away from the table and demanded ID. Avery handed hers over first. She had federal credentials because she had come from court. Daniels looked at them, then looked at her. And instead of stepping back and verifying properly, he started acting like the credentials were suspicious. That told everyone exactly where his head was. He had already decided the story. Now he wanted facts to fit it. Nia saw it too. She tried to stop it without saying too much. She identified herself in a limited way and told him he needed to verify before doing anything reckless. Daniels didn't like that either. He read restraint as evasiveness. Some officers do that when they've already locked into the wrong theory. By then, people were watching openly. The restaurant had gone quiet in that specific way public places do when everybody knows something is off. Servers slowed down. A couple of diners pulled out phones. The manager stayed close, which made it worse. Nobody wanted to be the one to tell Daniels he was moving too fast. Daniels asked where the wallet was. Avery said they had nothing to do with it and told him a complaint alone did not give him probable cause. Again, she was calm. Again, that made him worse. He told them not to touch their bags. He started speaking like he was already in the middle of a felony stop. Still no recovered wallet. Still no witness who saw a theft. Still no camera review. Still no proper verification. Then he crossed the line. Avery moved one hand toward her bag, not to grab a weapon, not to hide anything, just to shift it on the table. Daniels grabbed her wrist. That changed the whole thing. He put hands on her because he could, because he wanted immediate submission, and because he was now too deep into his own ego to back up. Avery pulled her arm back and told him not to touch her without cause. Daniels responded by escalating. He announced that both women were being detained for felony theft and possible fraudulent identification. He said it loud enough for the room to hear. He wanted the accusation to land before the facts did. That was the moment the stop turned ugly, not messy, not confused, ugly, because now he had chosen force over verification. Nia gave him one more chance. She told him he was interfering with federal business and needed a supervisor before he made this worse. Daniels ignored that too. He had an audience. He wanted to win in front of it. He pulled out the cuffs. A man near the bar started recording more carefully the second those cuffs came out. A woman at another table asked whether anyone had checked the cameras. Daniels ignored that. He cuffed Avery first. That mattered later. Video showed Avery did not resist. She didn't create the scene. She didn't raise her voice. Daniels escalated around her, then acted as if her refusal to panic was itself suspicious. Then he turned to Nia. This was the bigger mistake. Nia tried once more to get him to verify through a secure federal contact. She gave him the route to do this the right way. He chose not to use it before cuffing her. That decision wrecked him later because there was no good explanation for it. He had an off-ramp. He refused it. So now both sisters stood in handcuffs in the middle of a packed lunchroom because a patrol officer had decided his instincts mattered more than evidence. Then dispatch started catching up. Avery's credentials came back valid first. Current, federal, real. That should have ended it on the spot. Daniels didn't uncuff her. He started talking faster instead, reframing, filling space. Trying to hold onto the scene, bad sign. He knew the ground was moving under him. Then the second layer hit. The secure contact tied to Nia's identification started coming back through channels. That changed the tone immediately. Dispatch got careful, then tense, then very careful. Daniels had gone from mishandling a restaurant theft complaint to detaining someone tied to federal work he clearly did not understand. That was when Sergeant Elena Ruiz arrived. She stepped into a bad scene and saw the problem fast. 2 women in cuffs, 1 patrol officer giving a weak summary, a manager hovering nearby, a room full of witnesses. Phones still up. Ruiz asked Daniels what he had. He gave her theft, suspicious ID, non-compliance. It sounded thin because it was thin. Then dispatch confirmed Avery again. Ruiz looked at the credential in Daniels' hand, then at Avery, then at Daniels. A few seconds later, the callback link to Nia came through. That was it. Nobody in that room knew all the details yet. They didn't need to. The shift was obvious. Daniels had walked in thinking he was about to embarrass 2 suspects in public. Instead, he had created a recorded, witnessed, career-ending mess in front of a room full of people who were now paying very close attention. And the worst part for him? This was only the beginning. Sergeant Ruiz didn't need 10 minutes to understand Daniels had a problem. She needed about 10 seconds. The first confirmation had already come through. Avery's credentials were valid. Federal, current. No question. Ruiz asked Daniels whether he had run them before cuffing her. He gave the kind of answer officers give when they know the body cam is about to hurt them. Too many words, no clean answer. Then the second verification started landing. Nia's information wasn't something dispatch handled like a driver's license. It moved through a secure callback. That alone should have told Daniels he had stepped into something bigger than a restaurant complaint. Ruiz took the update, listened, and her expression changed right there in the dining room. Now she knew. One sister was a federal prosecutor. The other was tied to active federal work Daniels had just disrupted in public. That's when panic started, even if nobody said the word out loud. Ruiz told Daniels to uncuff them. Immediately. He hesitated for half a beat, which made it worse. Then he took the cuffs off Avery first, then Nia. Too late. Everybody had already seen the arrest. Several people were still recording. One person had gotten the whole cuffing on video, including Avery staying calm and Daniels talking like he had a solved felony case, with no evidence in hand. Ruiz tried to pull the scene back under control. She asked the manager to step aside. She separated Daniels from the sisters. She lowered her voice. Standard cleanup. The problem was this wasn't the kind of mess a lower voice could fix. Avery didn't make a speech. She didn't need to. She asked for Daniels' full name, badge number, and supervisor chain. Then she asked whether Ruiz understood that her unlawful detention had happened in front of a room full of witnesses after she presented valid federal credentials. Straight, cold, precise. Ruiz knew exactly what that meant. Nia was even more direct. She explained that Daniels had ignored multiple chances to verify identity through the proper channel before making physical contact and applying cuffs. She also made clear that the public arrest had created problems beyond embarrassment. Daniels had interfered with federal work he knew nothing about. That wasn't a dramatic line. That was the real damage. The missing wallet claim started falling apart almost immediately. The restaurant manager, who had acted very confident 15 minutes earlier, suddenly had no details. No one had seen the sisters take anything. No wallet had been found on them. No search had produced stolen property. No camera review had been done before police were called to the table. The original complaining customer got nervous too. Her version started shifting once it became obvious the stop had gone sideways. Then staff checked the area near the hostess stand. The wallet had been left under a chair. That detail buried Daniels even deeper, because now the whole thing looked exactly like what it was. A rushed accusation, a manager too eager to believe it, and an officer who skipped every safeguard because 2 calm black women didn't fit his idea of who belonged there. Ruiz heard that update and knew the department's position just got worse. Daniels tried to save himself. He started talking about suspicious behavior, inconsistent responses, possible concealment. None of it held up. The footage would show what happened. The room had eyes, the phones had timestamps. Dispatch had the verification logs. His body cam had his tone, his decisions, and the moment he chose cuffs before facts. That's the thing about officers like Daniels. They think authority gives them room to improvise. It does until the record exists. Once the record exists, improvisation turns into evidence. Avery asked for medical documentation of the wrist restraint and requested immediate preservation of all body cam, dispatch audio, CAD logs, restaurant surveillance, and witness information. She was already building the case, while Daniels was still trying to explain himself. That's the difference between somebody who knows the system and somebody who thinks the uniform is the system. Naya took a different track. She stepped aside and made a secure call. Short, controlled. No wasted words. That call changed the stakes again. Within minutes, people above Ruiz started getting notified. Not because anybody wanted drama, because they had to know that a local patrol officer had publicly detained someone connected to a federal matter after ignoring a verification route. Ruiz asked Avery whether she wanted EMS. Avery said she wanted documentation. She wanted names. She wanted incident numbers. She wanted a copy request placed on every recording before anything disappeared by accident or on purpose. Smart move. Too many people calm down after the cuffs come off. That's how departments survive these cases. They count on embarrassment fading into exhaustion. Avery wasn't built like that. She knew the apology phase means nothing if the paper trail doesn't lock in first. The lunch crowd had fully turned by then. At first, people watched like it was another police scene. Now they were whispering about Daniels. A man in a suit told Ruiz he had video from the first command at the table. A woman near the back said she recorded the moment Avery handed over her credentials. Another diner said Daniels never asked anyone to check cameras before he grabbed her. Bit by bit, the witnesses got sharper because now they understood what they had seen. The manager tried apologizing. Wrong timing, empty words. Avery barely acknowledged it. She knew where the real liability sat. The manager helped start it. Daniels turned it into a legal disaster. Then Internal Affairs got the first alert. Not a full investigation yet. Just the early call no officer wants attached to his name. Unlawful detention concern. Federal credential issue. Public recording. Possible bias exposure. Ruiz heard the call, answered carefully, and kept looking at Daniels like she already knew he'd be impossible to defend. He looked smaller now. Not sorry. Smaller. That happens when the performance dies. Without the audience fear, without the force, without the assumption that everyone will just accept his version, Daniels had nothing strong left. Just bad judgment and a growing stack of evidence. Avery and Nia left the restaurant without rushing. That mattered too. They didn't storm out. They didn't rant. They let the scene sit on Daniels exactly as he had made it. Outside, the next phase started. Avery called the U.S. Attorney's office and reported the detention. Clean summary. Time, place, officer, witnesses, credentials shown. Cuffs applied after verification was available. No emotion in the language. Just facts. That's how serious people make damage travel. Nia's side moved faster and quieter. Once her chain knew what happened, the concern wasn't optics, it was exposure. A public detention can blow attention onto patterns, locations, routines, faces. Daniels had no clue what kind of risk he'd created because he never stopped long enough to ask whether maybe he didn't know enough. By late afternoon, the first video hit social media. No fancy caption needed. Just the clip. Daniels at the table. Daniels refusing to slow down. Daniels putting cuffs on a calm woman in a blazer while diners stared. Then another clip. Then another. By evening, local reporters were calling the department. That was the point of no return. Because now it wasn't Daniels versus two women he thought he could overpower in a restaurant. Now it was Daniels versus video, witnesses, dispatch records, federal confirmation, and 2 sisters who actually understood how to make the system answer for what it did. And he still hadn't seen the worst part yet. By the next morning, the department had lost control of the story. The video was everywhere locally. Then it jumped wider. Not because it was loud, because it was clear. People could see Daniels arrive hot, skip basic verification, grab Avery, ignore warnings, and cuff both sisters like he was proud of it. That kind of footage kills the usual excuses before they even get drafted. The department first tried the standard line. Active investigation. Limited facts. No further comment. That didn't hold. Too many facts were already out. Avery's credentials had been confirmed on scene. The wallet had been found in the restaurant. No stolen property had been recovered from either sister. Witnesses were already talking. One of them was a law student. Another was a litigation paralegal. Bad room for a cop to freelance in. Avery moved first. She filed preservation notices fast. Bodycam, dashcam, dispatch audio, CAD logs, restaurant surveillance, officer notes, supervisor communications, incident report drafts. She didn't wait for a formal apology because apologies don't preserve evidence. Paperwork does. Then came the claim. Unlawful detention, false arrest, excessive force tied to the wrist grab and cuffing, civil rights violations, public humiliation, reputational harm, failure to train, failure to supervise, biased policing, clean structure, no wasted motion. Naya's side hit differently. Her detention triggered an internal federal review because Daniels had interfered with an active matter. The exact case details stayed sealed, but the damage didn't. Her cover status had been compromised enough that her assignment had to be adjusted. New logistics, new risk analysis, new costs. All because a patrol officer wanted to turn lunch into a power show. That raised the city's exposure hard. This wasn't just 2 bad cuffs anymore. It was local police interfering with federal personnel after ignoring direct verification routes. Departments hate that. City attorneys hate it more. Then discovery pressure started. Daniels' report came in first, and it already had problems. He padded it, claimed suspicious movements, claimed inconsistent answers, claimed officer safety concerns in a packed lunchroom where video showed 2 seated women and no actual threat. Classic mistake. He wrote for cover, not accuracy. Then the body cam got pulled. Bad move for him. Worse than bad. It showed Avery asking the legal basis for the detention. It showed Daniels refusing to answer clearly. It showed him treating valid federal credentials like props in a story he'd already written in his head. It showed Nia trying to get him to verify through the right channel. It showed him cuff first and think later. That ended the misunderstanding defense. Then Internal Affairs found something else. Daniels had prior complaints, not enough by themselves to end him earlier. Enough to make this one look less like a one-time mistake and more like a pattern people had ignored. Citizens had accused him before of escalating fast, talking down to people, and treating basic questions as defiance. A couple of complaints had gone nowhere. One had led to counseling. That history came back now and hit the department too, because once you keep a guy like that on the street, his next mess becomes partly yours. The city tried to settle quietly. Avery didn't go public with every detail right away. Smart. She let the record build first. Let the city see the problem clearly. Let Daniels' own report and footage fight each other. That's how you break resistance in these cases. You don't argue and the evidence can do the work. Nia stayed even quieter, but her presence behind the scenes mattered. Federal contacts were now paying attention to a local department that had embarrassed itself on camera and compromised protected work. That pressure wasn't public at first. It didn't need to be. It was there. A few weeks later, the department announced Daniels had been placed on leave. Nobody was impressed. Leave is what departments do when they're hoping the public gets distracted. This time, it didn't work. Reporters kept pulling on it. More witness video came out. The restaurant staff changed their story 3 different ways. The woman who lost the wallet admitted she never actually saw either sister take anything. She had assumed. That word showed up a lot. Assumed. The manager assumed. Daniels assumed. Funny how assumption keeps landing on the same kind of people. Then the hammer dropped. Daniels was fired. The department said he violated detention protocol, failed to properly verify identification, made an arrest without sufficient probable cause, and gave inaccurate justifications afterward. That language was careful, but the message was simple. He cooked his own career. It didn't end there. The state certification board opened review. Once the Bodycam and internal findings were in, his law enforcement certification went with it. That mattered more than the firing. A fired officer can sometimes hop departments. Decertification shuts more doors. Then the civil case settled. The amount stayed partly confidential, but enough came out to make the point. The city paid, a lot. Avery received damages tied to unlawful detention, reputational harm, and civil rights violations. Nia's side included the operational disruption her arrest created. The restaurant and management company got pulled in too and paid their share after their own rush-to-judgment failures became impossible to deny. That's what arrogance costs when there's video. The policy fallout came next. The department rolled out mandatory supervisor approval before escalating fraud or theft complaints involving credential disputes in low-evidence public settings. They changed verification procedures for government identification. They expanded bias review triggers when probable cause depended mostly on assumption and demeanor. They tightened preservation rules for body cam and public complaint incidents. None of that came from conscience. It came from damage. Avery went back to work. That part mattered. She didn't become a public mascot. She didn't build a media career off it. She went back to doing her job, which in some ways made the whole story hit harder. Daniels made the lunch his performance. Avery made the aftermath a case. Nia kept working, too, just on a different path after the disruption. No dramatic speech, no victory lap. Just adjustment, documentation, and moving forward. Real people usually don't get clean endings after this kind of thing. They get consequences, paperwork, stress, and the knowledge that they were right from the beginning. That's the lesson here. Daniels thought authority meant he could skip discipline. He thought the badge would cover the gaps. He thought public pressure would make 2 black women fold before facts mattered. Instead, he ran into 2 people who knew exactly what he was doing and knew how to make the record hold. That's why this story matters. Not because the sisters had important jobs. That made the fallout bigger, yes. But the real issue was what happened before Daniels knew who they were. He treated them like suspects first, because he thought he could. Everything after that just exposed him. So that's the story. A patrol officer turned a lunch complaint into a false felony arrest, ignored warnings, ignored verification, and ended up losing his job, his certification, and any claim that this was just a misunderstanding. 2 sisters got their names cleared, forced a payout, exposed a pattern, and pushed a department into changes it never would have made on its own. Let me know what you would have done in that restaurant, and whether you've ever seen someone in uniform push way past the facts because they thought nobody would challenge them. Share the story with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more.
Then ask the right question and do your job correctly.
You think because people know your name, you can stand wherever you want?
That is not what is happening here.
What I see is someone expecting everyone else to cover for him.
What you turned this into is an unlawful
Officer Miller thought he was the most powerful man in the room until he grabbed the arm of the one man in that building who could end his career with facts, witnesses, and the law. At a high-profile charity gala, he pushed past every warning, every correction, every chance to slow down. He had no idea he was detaining a black federal judge on property tied to the judge's own foundation. And once he put hands on him in front of donors, cameras, and city leadership, the whole thing stopped being a scene and turned into a career-killing event. Before this goes further, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about abuse of power, public accountability, and people who stay calm while somebody else self-destructs, hit like and subscribe. This wasn't some vague misunderstanding in a dark parking lot. That's what made it so bad. This happened under chandeliers, valley lights, security cameras, phone cameras, and a whole room full of people who understood status, optics, and liability. The second they saw Miller's tone was off. The man he stopped was Judge Malcolm Ellison, a federal judge with a reputation that reached past the courthouse. Late 50s, controlled, careful. Not the kind of man who needed to announce himself twice. He was one of the featured honorees that night. The gala itself raised money for legal aid clinics, scholarship funds, and youth mentorship programs. Half the city's money was there. The other half of the city's influence was there. Corporate sponsors, nonprofit boards, senior attorneys, a few elected officials, local media. Plenty of people who knew exactly who Malcolm Ellison was the second they saw him step out of the black sedan near the side entrance. And that was the first thing Miller got wrong. He looked at the car, not the context. The estate hosting the event had a circular drive in front, a secured service lane to the side, and a restricted access point near the garden entrance. Event staff had been moving vehicles with military-level coordination for over an hour. Valets had lists. Private security had lists. The foundation staff had lists. Everybody working that entrance knew the flow. Miller didn't care about the flow. He cared that he saw a black man near a restricted lane beside an expensive car. And in his head, that was enough to take over. He'd been assigned outside traffic support. Simple job. Keep the perimeter clean, coordinate with private security, don't freelance, don't create problems. Basic stuff. But Miller wasn't built for basic stuff when he thought he had an audience. He liked taking control fast. He liked the posture of enforcement. The body cam later showed it clearly. He walked up already convinced he was about to correct somebody. Judge Ellison had just stepped out of the vehicle and was speaking to an event coordinator about timing. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't trying to slip in anywhere. He had his formal invitation packet, credential badge, and phone in hand. Staff were already greeting him by name. Miller cut straight through that. He demanded identification in the kind of voice officers use when they want the whole area to know they're in charge, not firm, aggressive. He framed it like the judge had no business being where he stood. Then he started talking about unauthorized vehicle placement and restricted access, like he'd caught somebody trying something slick. Right there, the night could have gone 10 different ways. That's the important part. Miller had exits, plenty of them. An event coordinator immediately told him Judge Ellison was expected. A member of the private security team stepped in and explained that the vehicle had clearance for temporary drop-off. One of the valet supervisors tried to show Miller the access list. He brushed all of that aside. Fast. Too fast. That tells you what this was. He wasn't investigating. He was asserting. Judge Ellison answered him the way disciplined people answer men looking for a reaction, calmly. He identified himself. He explained he was a guest of honor. He pointed out that staff could verify everything in seconds. Miller treated every word like resistance. The crowd nearby started noticing because tone travels faster than facts. Guests at the outer edge of the reception area turned towards the driveway. Conversations stalled. A local news producer standing near the entrance lifted her phone. One donor did the same, then another. People do that now. They record first and sort it out later. And honestly, in a situation like this, that's exactly what saved the truth. Miller moved closer. Too close. He started giving commands instead of asking questions. He said the judge needed to stop talking and comply. He waved off the badge packet before really looking at it. He ignored the coordinator again. Then he said something that shifted the whole thing from ugly to dangerous. He suggested Judge Ellison was acting like he belonged there because people around him were covering for him. That was the line. That was where the room changed. Up to that point, some people still looked confused. Maybe this officer was just keyed up. Maybe he'd made a bad read and was about to fix it. But once he implied that the black man standing in formal wear at a gala in his own city couldn't possibly belong unless somebody was making excuses for him. The confusion started draining out of the air. People understood what they were watching. Judge Ellison didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture back. He simply repeated who he was, stated that staff had already confirmed it, and told Miller he needed to slow down before he created a legal problem for himself and for the department. That should have landed. It didn't. Some men hear a warning and take it. Miller heard one and got offended. He asked for a physical ID again, sharper this time. Judge Ellison reached towards his inside jacket pocket slowly, carefully, exactly how any sane person would want it done during a police encounter. Miller reacted like the movement itself justified escalation. He ordered the judge to stop reaching. Staff started talking over each other. One Foundation board member stepped forward and identified the judge by title. Another guest, a retired state appellate judge, called out that Miller needed to stand down and verify before doing anything stupid. Miller snapped back that nobody there was going to tell him how to do his job. That one mattered too, because now it wasn't about confusion. It was ego. He was no longer trying to determine who Malcolm Ellison was. He was trying to win in public, and Judge Ellison knew it. You could hear it in the even way he answered. He told Miller again that the property, the event staff, and the guest credentials would all confirm the same thing. He told him witnesses were recording. He told him there was still time to step back and correct course. Miller didn't step back. He squared up, put a hand near his cuffs, started giving the kind of clipped commands officers use when they want instant submission. Around them, people stopped pretending this would settle itself. Phones stayed up. A city council member moved away and started calling somebody. Private security looked trapped, as they knew intervening physically against a uniformed officer would make it worse. The valet line froze. Even the music inside the gala felt irrelevant at that point. Everybody saw the same thing. One man was keeping control. The other just had a badge and a bad temper. Then Miller told Judge Ellison to put his hands behind his back. Judge Ellison didn't argue. He didn't step back. He didn't perform for the crowd. He did the exact opposite of what Miller seemed to want. He stayed still and kept talking in the same controlled tone, telling the officer that this detention had no legal basis, that multiple people had already confirmed his identity, and that Miller was escalating in front of a recorded audience. Miller went ahead anyway. He grabbed Ellison's wrist, pulled his arm behind his back, and pushed him into the position. Hard enough to make people shout. Not hard enough to leave the kind of injury that would distract from the bigger issue. Just the kind of force arrogant officers use when they want pain and humiliation without looking out of control on paper. That's how men like him think. They think in reports before they think in consequences. Then the handcuffs clicked. That was it. The whole event changed in one sound. The crowd had been tense before. Now it was angry. You could feel that shift immediately. Guests moved closer, not farther away. Phones went higher. Staff stopped trying to be polite and started speaking over one another. Several people identified Judge Ellison again, louder this time with title, name, and role. One board member told Miller he was handcuffing the Host Foundation's principal honoree. A retired judge told him he was making a catastrophic mistake. A private security supervisor tried one last time to show him the credential list and the event clearance log. Miller ignored all of it because he'd already crossed the line in his own mind. Once officers like that commit in public, they stop thinking about whether they're right. They start thinking about how not to look weak. So he doubled down. He started talking about failure to comply, obstruction, restricted access. He threw out words that sounded official but didn't match the facts anybody could see. That happens a lot when bad policing gets exposed in real time. The officer starts building a case backward. First comes the force, then comes the excuse. Judge Ellison stood there in cuffs, jacket slightly twisted, face still composed. He told Miller very plainly that he was on private property connected to the event, that he had been identified by multiple witnesses, and that Miller had now added unlawful restraint to an already baseless stop. He also made it clear that every second after that point increased the department's liability. And Miller still didn't stop. He made a remark about how everybody suddenly had a title when police showed up. Then he questioned whether Ellison was actually supposed to be inside at all. He said it like he'd caught the room in a lie. That was the mask-off moment. No room left for confusion after that. He wasn't sorting out a security issue. He had decided this black man in formal wear did not fit his idea of who belonged at that event, and he treated that assumption like evidence. The people around him knew it. They heard it. So did the cameras. One local reporter had moved close enough to catch the whole exchange cleanly on video. Another guest was streaming to a private account that later got clipped and spread everywhere. The Bodycam got it too, which made the department's first attempt at damage control dead on arrival before sunrise. Miller finally demanded physical identification again. This time, a Foundation staff member stepped in with Judge Ellison's credential packet already open. A federal courthouse ID was visible. So was the gala credential with Ellison's photo, title, and guest of honor designation. Miller looked at it, really looked at it, and you could see the exact second the ground shifted under him. He froze. Not for long. Maybe a second. Maybe two. But long enough for everybody around him to know he just realized exactly who he had handcuffed. Judge Malcolm Ellison, United States District Judge, honored guest, identified repeatedly before the cuffs ever went on. Miller's posture changed right there. It wasn't remorse. It was panic trying to hide inside authority. He started asking clipped questions nobody needed answered anymore. He wanted to know why nobody had made it clear. That lie didn't survive 3 feet of distance. Half the people standing there had done exactly that, repeatedly. He wanted to pivot into confusion now because certainty had just become toxic. Judge Ellison didn't let him rewrite the scene. Still cuffed, he laid it out in order. He stated that Miller had initiated an unsupported detention. He stated that staff and witnesses had verified identity and authorization multiple times. He stated that Miller had used physical restraint without probable cause, had ignored available confirming information, and had continued after explicit warning, calm, clean, precise. He wasn't speaking like a man trying to win an argument. He was speaking like a man building a record in real time. That's what broke Miller more than the title did. Not just who Ellison was, how he was handling it. Sirens didn't flood in. This wasn't that kind of scene. What arrived instead was worse for Miller. Supervisors. A patrol sergeant got there first, after calls from event security, and a city official inside the gala reached command staff. He took one look at the crowd, the phones, the cuffs, and Ellison's credentials in a staff member's hand, and his face changed immediately. He pulled Miller aside. Quick, sharp, too late. Then an assistant chief arrived from inside the event itself. He had been attending the gala in a suit, not a uniform, and he knew Judge Ellison personally. That made the whole thing even uglier. There was no buffer anymore, no maybe, no ambiguity. Just a senior department official walking into a live disaster caused by one patrol officer who refused every off-ramp. The assistant chief ordered the cuffs removed at once. Miller did it, hands suddenly less steady now. Ellison rubbed one wrist once, adjusted his jacket, and stayed exactly as composed as he'd been from the start. That made Miller look even smaller. Everybody there saw it. The assistant chief started apologizing. The sergeant started separating witnesses. Somebody from the mayor's office had already arrived at the edge of the driveway. Phones were still recording. Nobody trusted the department to summarize this honestly anymore, and honestly, they were right not to. Judge Ellison didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He simply stated that this incident would be documented in full, that all video had to be preserved, and that nobody at the scene should mistake removal of the cuffs for removal of liability. Then he looked straight at Miller and made the point that ended the encounter for good. He told him authority meant nothing without judgment, and tonight he'd shown he had neither. That was the end of the confrontation, not the end of Miller's problem, the start of it. By midnight, the department already knew this wasn't containable. There were too many angles: guest video, security footage, body cam, valet area cameras, phone clips from donors, staff, reporters, even two city officials standing near the entrance. Miller had picked the worst possible place to act like nobody would check him. A public street would have been bad. A charity gala packed with lawyers, judges, media people, and people who understood evidence. Career suicide. The first department statement came out before sunrise, and it was exactly the kind of weak, defensive language people are sick of hearing. It called the incident an active scene under review. It said the full context was still being gathered. It praised professionalism while avoiding the actual facts. That lasted a few hours. Then the body cam clip leaked. That changed everything. The video showed Miller brushing off staff. It showed witnesses identifying Judge Ellison more than once. It showed the federal credential. It showed the event pass. It showed Miller escalating after he'd already been given the information he needed. Worst of all for him, it showed the tone. People always focus on force, but tone tells the truth faster. He didn't sound cautious. He sounded certain. Certain in the dumbest possible way. Like he had decided what kind of man Ellison was before the interaction even started. By morning, the clip was everywhere. Legal analysts broke down the stop frame by frame. Civil rights groups picked it up. Former prosecutors went on local and national programs, explaining that the problem wasn't just a bad arrest. It was a chain of bad decisions. Unsupported detention, refusal to verify, physical restraint without a valid basis, public humiliation. Then the attempt to justify it after the fact. That last part buried him, because Miller had filed a preliminary report before the full footage surfaced, and the report didn't match the video. He wrote that Judge Ellison had been evasive. He implied staff had interfered before identity could be confirmed. He suggested the detention happened during a fluid security situation. It was nonsense. The footage shredded it line by line. That's when this stopped being only about misconduct and became about dishonesty, too. Departments can sometimes drag their feet on arrogance. Dishonesty on body cam is harder to carry. Prosecutors hate officers who poison cases. Command staff know it. City attorneys know it. Once the report fell apart, Miller stopped being just a liability in this incident. He became a liability in every case he'd ever touched. Then internal affairs started pulling his history. That's where it got worse. Not because they found one prior complaint. They found a pattern. Several complaints from previous stops. Escalation during minor encounters. Dismissive treatment of black drivers. Repeated notes from supervisors about poor judgment under perceived challenge. A prior incident where a lieutenant recommended remedial de-escalation training. Another complaint had been closed without full follow-up after body cam footage was marked inconclusive. One warning, then another, then another. Nothing big enough alone to force the issue. Together, it looked obvious. The department hadn't created Miller's ego, but it had tolerated it. That part mattered to Judge Ellison, more than Miller's embarrassment ever did. He didn't turn the thing into a personal revenge campaign. He treated it like what it was. A public example of what happens when an officer with a badge, weak discipline, and racial assumptions gets too comfortable being protected by the institution around him. Within 24 hours, the mayor held a press conference. She didn't soften it. She said the conduct on video was unacceptable, humiliating, and legally indefensible. She confirmed an outside review. She also made it clear the city would not hide behind vague wording while the evidence sat in public view. That statement told everybody something simple. The department had lost political cover. 2 days later, Miller was suspended. A week after that, he was terminated. The official grounds were broad enough to hold up and specific enough to destroy him. Conduct unbecoming, unlawful detention, failure to follow identification and verification procedure, discriminatory conduct, false and misleading reporting, violation of department de-escalation policy. Once dishonesty went on the record, his chances of working serious law enforcement again dropped through the floor. Then the state certification board opened decertification proceedings. That was the real end. A fired officer can sometimes bounce around. A decertified one usually can't. Not in any serious agency that wants to survive public records requests. The civil lawsuit landed right after. Judge Ellison's legal team didn't file something flashy. They filed something disciplined: federal civil rights claims, unlawful seizure, equal protection violations, municipal liability arguments tied to prior notice and failure to act on complaint history, negligent retention, public humiliation damages, preservation demands for every piece of footage, radio traffic, dispatch record, supervisory message, and complaint file touching Miller's history. It was the kind of lawsuit that doesn't just ask for money. It asks who knew what, when they knew it, and why they kept the wrong man on the street. The city tried the usual early posture: regret without admission, respect for the process, quiet talk about resolution. But the facts were awful and everybody knew it. The judge hadn't mouthed off. He hadn't resisted. He hadn't been hard to identify. The crowd had done half the officer's job for him, and Miller still forced the outcome he wanted. A jury would have seen that in about 10 minutes. So the city settled. The number got attention, but the non-monetary terms hit harder. Mandatory outside review of high complaint officers, tighter preservation rules for body cam and event footage, new requirements for identity verification before physical detention in non-violent encounters, expanded bias review triggers, better supervisor intervention standards, mandatory psychological screening after repeated escalation complaints. Not because politicians suddenly became moral heroes, because the footage made denial too expensive. Judge Ellison pushed further after the settlement. He worked with state lawmakers, bar associations, and judicial committees on a package of accountability reforms. Nothing dramatic. No speech-making nonsense. Just practical fixes. Stronger complaint pattern review. Faster flags for officers who repeatedly escalate low-level encounters. Clearer decertification standards where misconduct and dishonesty overlap. More serious training on constitutional stops, bias recognition, and public-facing restraint. Boring to some people, effective in real life. That's how real change usually looks. Not loud. Structural. As for Miller, his name became the example nobody wanted attached to a department. His firing stayed public. The certification action moved forward. His report-writing credibility was gone. Prosecutors didn't want him. Agencies didn't want him. City lawyers definitely didn't want him. He'd walked into that gala thinking a badge made him the final authority in any space he entered. A few minutes of ego proved the opposite. In a modern system with cameras, records, and people willing to fight, authority without judgment doesn't protect a man. It exposes him. Judge Ellison went back to work. That part matters. He didn't let the incident become his identity. He stayed on the bench. He kept his dignity. He turned one officer's public failure into a case study on discipline, oversight, and what happens when somebody calm knows the law better than the man trying to control him. And that's really the story. Not that Miller didn't know who he was grabbing, that was the beginning. The real problem was that he thought it wouldn't matter. He thought he could force first, explain later, and the system would stretch around him like it always had. That night, it didn't. So what would you have done if you were standing there, watching it happen in real time? Have you ever seen somebody with authority push too far? Because they assumed nobody would challenge them? Put it in the comments. Share the story with somebody who still thinks professionalism in policing is optional. And subscribe for more stories about power, accountability, and the exact moment arrogant people realize the room is turned on them.